The Trumpet Daily with Stephen Flurry.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Trumpet Daily radio show. Lots to get to on today's program. Some pretty good clips here that we'll be playing in just a few moments. The chill is in the air. It's definitely the winter time, or we're heading into it. I guess we have the clocks changing this weekend here in the U.S. It happened last weekend in the UK, so I forgot to mention that on one of the broadcasts, that the European listeners, the listeners in the UK, would have to listen an hour earlier this week if they want to get the live feed anyway. Most people, though, I think, listen to the podcast later on when it's convenient for them. In any event, it is definitely getting chilly each morning. I mentioned to the students yesterday, I was just finishing up my assembly message in my dining room, overlooking the front porch area and the little flower bed that we have there. And these three deer came right up to the porch, basically, to nibble on some of the monkey grass in the little flower bed. So I got to see them up close, and they didn't see me. So I just sat there gazing at these beautiful creatures that feel so comfortable now, just surrounding our facilities here, the homes on campus. They basically just traverse the campus from one side to the other and evidently they feel quite comfortable, even where there's quite a lot of activity going on around them. While we were on the trip to Jerusalem, by the way, my father just mentioned briefly a little bit about the late Charles Krauthammer and how much he brought to the round table on the Fox, I think Brett Baer's show on Fox News in the evening. And he mentioned, too, how much Mr. Krauthammer loved the Washington Nationals. And, of course, they just won the World Series last night. I haven't watched much baseball in the last 10 or 15 years, but I did watch the game last night. And what a wonderful game it is, especially when it's a very intense all or nothing type of game. I know there's a lot of people that don't really get into baseball, and certainly they have a good point when they talk about how long the season is and how boring the games can be in the middle of the season. But when you get to the end, the World Series, and you have a good competitive game or series, it really can be enjoyable to watch. But anyway, Charles Krauthammer, he loved the Washington Nationals. And they got the team, Washington did, from, I think it was Montreal back in 2005. And, of course, Krauthammer lived in D.C., and as soon as the team moved there, he got season tickets. And I think he explained in an interview that he would finish off with his roundtable discussion on Fox News, and it was about 7 or 8 minutes drive from the studio in D.C. to the Nationals park. And so they would finish the show right before 7. He would take off in his car, get to and if you know anything about Mr. Krauthammer, he was in a wheelchair, so he had to get around and drive with all these special features in his car. But he would hurry over to the Nationals park, and he'd get there and settle in generally about the start of the last half of the first inning, and then he would stay there. And he just talked about how much he was fascinated by the game, and he would study the game. He loved the statistics of the game. And this is a little bit of an exchange that he had with Brett Baer while he was at the Nationals park. He died back in, I think it was June of 2018, so a little over a year ago. But this interview, I think, was back in 2017, and here he is talking a little bit about baseball. Clip 1.
When I was a kid, my brother gave me a book of box scores, which is just raw numbers of who did what. And the book was a puzzle book. At the bottom of each box score, they'd ask you, who got a double in the second inning? And you had to figure it out backwards. So I've always associated baseball with trying to work stuff out. And that's always stayed with me. When I'm watching the game, I'm trying to figure out what those guys are doing down there.
What do you think it is about baseball that draws you in?
Probably that it's so attached to my childhood. I played a lot. My brother and I would run around, look for ball games. I was an all-field no-hit, but I could field. I couldn't hit very well, but I fielded pretty well. And I loved to field. I mean, there was nothing better than going in the hole for a backhanded play and coming up with a jump throw. I mean, that was like, so when I see these guys do it, and they do it effortlessly.
Is that why you love it so much?
Part of it is, you see your own youth. You see how you spent your childhood, and then you feel it when you watch them do it.
That's Charles Krauthammer from an interview a couple of years ago. He died at the age of 68. And as his son said recently on Fox News, he would have been cheering loudly last night when the Nationals won the World Series. His son said he would have loved it. He would have been as happy as a little kid. He went to nearly all the Nationals' home games for the whole time they were in D.C. He would have been at every playoff game. Fox News says, in the spirit of Charles Krauthammer's well-known affection and dedication to the Nats, his close friend and colleague, talks about Brett Baer and the interview, some of which you saw just a moment ago. So for what it's worth, I thought I'd just mention that, particularly since my father brought up the subject on one of the plane flights we were on, and how much he missed Krauthammer's input on that panel. Since we're on lighter subjects, I thought I would also play a clip from Boris Johnson. Yesterday, he bid farewell to John Bercow, the guy that's basically he presides over the House of Commons, so he's like the House Speaker. And this is a radical leftist. This is someone he basically has changed the rules on the fly just to try to hurt Boris Johnson, to try to prevent Brexit. It's been going on for some time now, and Johnson, to his credit, yesterday he somewhat jokingly says goodbye to Mr. Bercow, and you can see just from this clip how much of a likable fellow Mr. Johnson is. Again, with at least the everyday, average, ordinary British citizen. But it also says a lot too, I think, about just the decorum and just trying to uphold a certain standard of civility. Sometimes it doesn't always hold. We know this. It certainly isn't holding here in the United States. But I love this clip yesterday of Mr. Johnson saying goodbye to his nemesis. Clip 12.
Questions to the Prime Minister.
But, Mr. Speaker, I know the whole House will want to join me in recording that after 10 tumultuous years, this is your last Prime Minister's questions. And as befits a distinguished former Wimbledon competitor, you have sat up there in your high chair, and not just as an umpire, ruthlessly adjudicating on the finer points of parliamentary procedure with your trademark Tony Montana scowl, Mr. Speaker. Not just as a commentator, offering your own opinions on the rallies you are watching, sometimes acerbic and sometimes kindly, but above all as a player in your own right, peppering every part of the chamber with your own thoughts and opinions, like some tennis ball machine, some uncontrollable tennis ball machine, Mr. Speaker, delivering a series of literally unplayable, formally unreturnable volleys and smashes. And although we may disagree about some of the legislative innovations that you have favoured, there is no doubt in my mind that you have been a great servant of this Parliament and of this House of Commons.
Andrew Mitchell.
So there you go, a bit of humor from the British Prime Minister saying goodbye to Mr. Bercow. Well, while we were away at the Feast of Tabernacles, the U.S. Attorney General William Barr, he gave an outstanding speech at the University of Notre Dame. That's the university in Indiana. And we weren't on the radio, so we didn't talk too much about this speech. I think it was on oh boy, when was it? It was earlier in October. I think it happened during the speech. But before I play some clips from the Attorney General's speech, I just want to remind you of a few things that my father has written about the new direction that the Trump presidency has given to the United States. You're familiar with the temporary resurgence and so on. But as he wrote in that article on saving America from the radical left temporarily, he talked about how that for the 8 years under Barack Obama, the forces of the radical left were on the march, virtually unchecked. There was nothing there to stop them or to even slow them down. And then, as my father says, Donald Trump has proved himself willing to take a stand where others have not. He said it's quite something to behold, him resisting these anti-American forces. And then he went on to say in that same article that with the Trump presidency, it's obvious that there's a clear change in direction for the United States of America, a new direction. They're not trying to trash the Constitution at every move. And there is a temporary saving of the nation by the hand of Jeroboam. You can see prophecies in Amos 7. You can see 2 Kings 14 for some of the history. But then last year, the first part of 2018, William Barr becomes the United States Attorney General. And as my father has written, it's like he came out of nowhere. He wrote this memo. He wrote this memo back in, the middle of 2017, I guess. Or maybe I'm getting a little mixed up on the dates. In any event, let me just quote from this article from August. This is just a little while ago in the Trumpet. The timing of Mr. Barr's nomination, hearings, and confirmation is interesting. He was nominated by President Trump on December 7th, 2018. So I think his memo would have been in the middle of 2018, so back in June. This is the one where he criticized what the Mueller investigation was doing and how that, like I said yesterday, they were divining motives in President Trump and his assistants. But my father says his confirmation hearings occurred on January 15th and 16th. That would have been earlier this year, 2019. These are dates that, as my father says, we watch closely. It says here, Mr. Barr he was already Attorney General once before. It's remarkable that he would take the job again. He's only the second man to serve 2 separate terms as Attorney General. It says Barr loves the Constitution and understands it as few men do. During his confirmation hearing, he said he reveres the law. My father says it's been a long time since America has had someone like this in the Department of Justice. It's refreshing to have someone praise and uphold the law at a time like this. He says this should be uncontroversial, but in a way it has challenged the whole government structure in Washington. President Trump's enemies, of course, they would label him as a controversial figure. But in fact, he's just doing his job. He's just trying to uphold the law. This is from that August article. Once again, it says, now they are being pursued. This is talking about the deep state and the Obama administration and all these officials that are being exposed. Now they're being pursued by a man who reveres the law and loves the Constitution. I believe we're going to start to get an even clearer view of the rot that was there, and it will be significantly cleaned up. This is what my father said back in August. So you think about all of the proceedings going on now, the sham impeachment investigation, and it's all meant really to cover this up, the fact that they're about to be exposed. My father said there are already whistleblowers who see what Barr is doing and are coming forward to reveal the wrongdoing they are privy to. I believe he said, I believe that God had a hand in Mr. Barr coming along. Somebody had to come in, reverse what the Obama administration had done, and help Jeroboam save Israel. So God had a hand in all of this. And he went on to say that Amos 7 indicates that the president's going to gain control of what is done in these powerful agencies, in these federal buildings all over Washington. Saving America temporarily. Mr. Barr was nominated, as you heard there, in December of 2018. He's in office earlier this year, February of 2019. And what a change in direction to have someone heading up the DOJ who reveres the Constitution. It had to happen in order to reverse the direction or to change the direction. Listen to this clip from his Notre Dame speech. He gave the speech on October 11th, so that was, I guess, 3 weeks ago or so. Here's clip 2.
The challenge we face is precisely what the Founding Fathers foresaw would be the supreme test of a free society. They never thought that the main danger to the Republic would come from external foes. The central question was whether, over the long haul, we the people could handle freedom. The question was whether the citizens in such a free society could maintain the moral discipline and virtue necessary for the survival of free institutions. By and large, the founding generation's view of human nature was drawn from the classical Christian tradition. These practical statesmen understood that individuals, while having the potential for great good, also had the capacity for great evil. Men are subject to powerful passions and appetites, and if unrestrained, are capable of ruthlessly riding roughshod over their neighbors and the community at large. No society can exist without some means of restraining individual rapacity. But if you rely on the coercive power of the government to impose those restraints, the framers believed, this would inevitably lead to a government that is too controlling, and you would end up with no liberty, just tyranny. On the other hand, unless you had some effective restraint, you end up with something equally dangerous: licentiousness, the unbridled pursuit of personal appetites at the expense of the common good. This is just another form of tyranny, where the individual is enslaved by his appetites and the possibility of any healthy community life crumbles.
That's William Barr at Notre Dame 3 weeks ago, giving us some pretty important history on what the founders were wrestling with. They wanted Americans to enjoy freedoms. But there's no freedom, like my father has written, there's no freedom without law. This is from Character in Crisis, our booklet. It says, as far as human government goes, the United States started about as right as any government man has ever produced. Critics today can say what they will about why it started right, but the Founding Fathers all seem to be in perfect agreement on the issue. The country began in fertile ground because it was founded upon religion and morality. You see, that's what was there to restrain individual rapacity, as he said in that speech. Without it, the experiment wouldn't work. That's what the founders told us. My father says these are the two fundamental building blocks upon which America was built: religion and morality. That had to be there so that the individual could be restrained. Those appetites, those powerful passions Yes, we want the freedom, but we've got to make sure that those passions and appetites are restrained so that it doesn't just lead to ruthlessly riding roughshod over the community, over the nation. Here's a little more from his speech 3 weeks ago, clip 3.
So the founders decided to take a gamble, and they called it a great experiment. They would leave the people broad liberty, they would limit the coercive power of the government, and they would place their trust in the self-discipline and virtue of the American people. In the words of Madison, we have staked our future on the ability of each of us to govern ourselves. And this is really what they meant by self-government. It did not mean primarily the mechanics by which we select a representative legislature. It referred to the capacity of each individual to restrain and govern themselves. But what was the source of this internal controlling power? In a free republic, those restraints could not be handed down from above by philosopher kings. Instead, social order must flow up from the people themselves, freely obeying the dictates of inwardly possessed and commonly shared moral values. And to control willful human beings with an infinite capacity to rationalize, those moral values must rest on authority independent of men's wills. They must flow from the transcendent supreme being. In short, in the framers' view, free government was only suitable and sustainable for a religious people, a people who recognized that there was a transcendent moral order antecedent to both the state and to man-made laws, and had the discipline to control themselves according to those enduring principles. As John Adams put it, we have no government armed with the power which is capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate for the government of any other.
That last bit there was, that quote was used. We used it in Character in Crisis, maybe in No Freedom Without Law as well. I can't remember. But I know we've used that John Adams quote before. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It's wholly inadequate for the government of any other. It's really, that's some deep content there in this speech. The Attorney General explaining what it means. Self-government, what does that mean? Is that just voting for your representative? In fact, it has to do with governing yourself. Restraining those appetites, those passions, so they don't just go out of control. That's the current Attorney General of the United States. You talk about a new direction. This is very different than what was there before 2017. Very different. My father says this in the booklet, Character in Crisis. George Washington, America's first president, championed this cause, that high morals and sincere religion had to be the fundamental building blocks of American society if it was to succeed and prosper. See, like the Attorney General said, they were taking a gamble. They called it an experiment, and they said that it wouldn't work without religion and morality to restrain the individual. It says in his first inaugural address in 1789, President Washington said, "The foundations of our national policy will be laid in the pure and immutable principles of private morality." And then my father says, what we do in the privacy of our own home does matter. For Washington, this was not a peripheral issue. It was the foundation of our national policy. This was how the experiment was founded. This was national policy from the beginning. Listen to this next clip from the Attorney General, Mr. Barr, clip 4.
Modern secularists dismiss this idea of morality as sort of otherworldly superstition imposed by a killjoy clergy. But in fact, Judeo-Christian moral standards are the ultimate utilitarian rules for human conduct. They reflect the rules that are best for man, not in the by and by, but in the here and now. They are like God's instruction manual for the best running of man and the best operation of human society. And by the same token, violations of these moral laws have bad real-world consequences for man and for society. We may not pay the price immediately, but over time, the harm is real.
It's as if he's read Character in Crisis or Mr. Armstrong's writings. The instruction manual. Mr. Armstrong referred to the Bible quite often as God's instruction manual that he gave to mankind. But man won't use it. He won't use the Bible to figure out how to live. It's our rule book. That's the Attorney General of the United States. It's pretty incredible. In Character in Crisis, it says Alexis de Tocqueville's 19th century observations on the American Republic answer this critical question. It says, after touring America, well, it talks about his tour through the 1830s, I think it was, and then he wrote all these essays. It says, de Tocqueville acknowledged that religion and morality were indispensable to the maintenance of the American Republic. Why indispensable? He said that while the constitutional law of liberty allowed Americans complete freedom to do as they pleased, religion prevented them from doing that which was immoral and unjust. This is exactly what the Attorney General is pointing out. You can see what he's grounded in. It's this history, de Tocqueville and others, the founders. He's just going back to what they said. That's our history, after all. That's how it all got started. Certainly, there's a lot of lessons we can take away from that. In the beginning, the founders said, make use of God's instruction manual. My father says, in short, de Tocqueville surmised, liberty could not be governed apart from religious faith, lest there be anarchy. Without the moral restrictions of a higher spiritual law, the liberty afforded Americans in the Constitution would be abused. That's what we're seeing today. The liberty's being abused. George Washington knew that. So did the founders. That's why they kept talking about religion and morality. They didn't want to see the United States, this experiment, this gamble. They didn't want to see it just self-destruct. And so they said, you better make sure that you learn this lesson. You better understand the foundation. You better stay on that rock-solid foundation, or else you're going to, as Lincoln said, die by suicide. When we come back, we'll play you a few more clips from the Attorney General's speech at Notre Dame 3 weeks ago. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily Radio Show. We'll be right back.
This is KPCG-FM, and this is the Trumpet Daily.
To America's founding fathers, character meant everything to the success of the nation and its leadership. The Constitution was based upon the fundamental principles of religion and morality. These were the primary building blocks of the American nation. George Washington said, "The foundations of our national policy will be laid in the pure and immutable principles of private morality. Character was no minor issue to America's first president. He regarded it as the basis of national policy. Where did the Founding Fathers develop these ideas? Many of these principles stemmed from the Holy Scriptures. The Bible provided early Americans with the instruction and guidance of how to properly govern one's life. These beliefs helped build a nation of strong families and upright leaders. Today, America has dismissed the Bible as the foundation of developing righteous character. Men now leave it to themselves to determine right from wrong. Where has the rejection of biblically based principles led this nation? There is a cause for these effects. To understand the course of events that have led this nation to its current state, visit thetrumpet.com and click on the Literature tab to request our free booklet, Character in Crisis.
The Trumpet Daily.
I think we all recognize, that over the past 50 years, religion has been under increasing attack. On the one hand, we have seen the steady erosion of our traditional Judeo-Christian moral system and a comprehensive effort to drive it from the public square. On the other hand, we see the growing ascendancy of secularism and the doctrine of moral relativism. By any honest assessment, the consequences of this moral upheaval have been grim. Virtually every measure of social pathology continues to gain ground.
That's the Attorney General from his speech 3 weeks ago, talking about the attack on religion and morality for the past 50 years. You talk about a new direction. Amos 7, of course, talks about the King's Chapel, the alliance with the Jeroboam end or the Jeroboam leader, and religion. It's not true religion, we know this. But how refreshing to hear a man heading up the Department of Justice talking about a moral system that's been driven from the public square, that's come under assault. And we've got to get back to it. That's what he's saying. Now you think about the thinking on the other side. There they are as they go about destroying religion and morality and then maintaining that everything's getting better and better, that we're becoming more moral and upright. It's exactly the opposite. Here again, Character in Crisis. It says, today Americans have departed from the ideals of our forefathers. We reason that religion and morality are nice, but certainly not necessary for the overall well-being of the nation. We've been led to falsely assume that private morality and public duty are separate issues. So you do whatever you want, live however you want. And then the politicians, they'll still lead us to the promised land. It's not happening. It says George Washington would have been appalled by such reasoning, and he was the father of our nation. What about the father? What about the founding father? Abraham Lincoln would have been appalled, and he saved the nation from ruin during the Civil War. What about these towering figures of American history? What would they think about the reasoning, the reasoning on the university campuses today, the reasoning within the radical left? Here again is Attorney General Barr from his Notre Dame speech 3 weeks ago, clip 6.
Along with the wreckage of the family, we are seeing record levels of depression and mental illness, dispirited young people, soaring suicide rates, increasing numbers of angry and alienated young males, an increase in senseless violence, and a deadly drug epidemic. As you know, over 70,000 people die a year from drug overdoses. That is more casualties in a year than we experienced during the entire Vietnam War. I won't dwell on the bitter results of the new secular age. Suffice it to say that the campaign to destroy the traditional moral order has coincided, and I believe has brought with it immense suffering and misery. And yet the forces of secularism, ignoring these tragic results, press on with even greater militancy. Among the militant secularists are many so-called progressives. But where is the progress?
Wow. Where is the progress? You call yourself a progressive. You're heading up a progressive movement. But where is the progress? Here he is just pointing out the obvious, the great paradox, as Mr. Armstrong said. Mr. Armstrong, who talked about the instruction manual and mankind not using it the way that it should be used. And then saying we've had all these advancements in technology, but look at the appalling evils. Look at the depression. Look at the mental illness. Look at the wreckage of the family. Look at the soaring suicide rates. Look at the drug epidemic. 70,000 people per year overdosing on drugs. 70,000. Every single year. Where's the progress? You look around and you see immense suffering, wreckage, and misery. Here again is Mr. Barr from 3 weeks ago, clip 7.
But today we face something different that may mean that we cannot count on the pendulum swinging back. First is the force, fervor, and comprehensiveness of the assault on organized religion we are experiencing today. This is not decay. This is organized destruction. Secularists and their allies have marshaled all the forces of mass communication, popular culture, the entertainment industry, and academia in an unremitting assault on religion and traditional values. These instruments are used not only to affirmatively promote secular orthodoxy, but also to drown out and silence opposing voices and to attack viciously and hold up to ridicule any dissidents. One of the ironies, as some have observed, is that the secular project has itself become a religion pursued with religious fervor. It is taking on all the trappings of religion, including inquisitions and excommunication. Those who defy the creed risk a figurative burning at the stake, social, educational, and professional ostracism, and exclusion waged through lawsuits and savage social media campaigns.
Wow, he's talking about an America that's under attack, as my father wrote in his booklet. Satan is cast down and he is full of wrath. He is the prince of the power of the air. He has surcharged the air with this kind of organized destruction. They've got the popular culture, they've got the entertainment industry, they've got academia, the university campus, politicians, at least half of them. America under attack. And it is a religious fervor. It has this secular project has become a religion, says the Attorney General. And he's right. He's right. You go against it, and figuratively, you're going to be burned at the stake, ostracized, disfellowshipped. We're seeing it happen day in and day out. Here's another bit from his speech, clip 8.
But today, in the face of all the increasing pathologies, instead of addressing the underlying cause, We have cast the state in the role of the alleviator of bad consequences. We call on the state to mitigate the social costs of personal misconduct and irresponsibility. So the reaction to growing illegitimacy is not sexual responsibility, but abortion. The reaction to drug addiction is safe injection sites. The solution to the breakdown of the family is for the state to set itself up as an ersatz husband for the single mother and an ersatz father for the children. The call comes for more and more social programs to deal with this wreckage. And while we think we're solving problems, we are underwriting them. We start with an untrammeled freedom, and we end up as dependents of a coercive state on whom we depend.
I'm just listening to this thinking that my students in the freshman class need to hear all of this. What a wonderful speech. What a wonderful speech. He says there that we're dealing with the effects and not the cause. We think we're solving problems. In fact, we're underwriting them. We're encouraging them. We make it worse. And it's because the focus is not on self-government. It's not on ruling your own spirit well. The focus is on living in the moment. No restraints. And well, we're seeing all of the wreckage that comes as a result. Listen to this next bit, clip 9.
Christianity teaches a micro-morality. We transform the world by focusing on our own personal morality and transformation. The new secular religion teaches macro-morality. One's morality is not gauged by their private conduct, but rather their commitment to political causes and collective action to address various social problems. This system allows us not to worry so much about the strictures on our own private lives, because we can find salvation on the picket line. We can signal our finely tuned moral sensibilities by participating in demonstrations on this cause or on that.
Now, we talked earlier this week about just the mass protests that are sweeping across this earth. Every nation, and a lot of them, they're fueled by the youth. This gal from Sweden, this little teenager, who's traveling the world to lead protests against climate change or demanding that something ought to be done. It's a religion. That's the new moral compass. Climate theology. Macro morality, as he says there. Instead of focusing in on personal morality, teaching individuals like we do here at God's College. This is how we ought to live. These are commandments that we're meant to obey. Don't bear false witness. Don't let a spirit of hatred fill your heart. That's murder. And honor your father and your mother. This is the first commandment with promise. These are God's commandments. This is how you keep those freedoms from causing so much wreckage. Even God's purpose and plan. You think about the freedom that he gives us in the law, though. It has to be in the law. But we're free moral agents, and we have to choose. We have to choose God's way of life. We have to choose to obey God's law. Otherwise, our lives end in ruin. Clip 10 here.
Similarly today, militant secularists do not have a live and let live spirit. They are not content to leave religious people alone to practice their faith. Instead, they seem to take delight in compelling people to violate their conscience. For example, the last administration sought to force religious employers, including Catholic religious orders, to violate their sincerely held religious views by funding contraceptive and abortifacient coverage in their health plans. And similarly, recently, California has sought to require pro-life pregnancy centers to provide notices of abortion rights. This refusal to accommodate the free exercise of religion is relatively recent. Just 25 years ago, there was a broad consensus in our society that our laws should accommodate religious belief.
He's talking there about the previous administration. This is the new direction. The previous administration sought to force religious employers to violate their sincerely held religious views. That's what we had with the previous administration. Now there's a new direction. Now the nation's being saved temporarily. The King's Chapel. That's what we're seeing here. One final clip, clip 11.
Ground zero for these attacks on religion are the schools. And to me, this is the most serious challenge to religious liberty today. For anyone who has a religious faith, by far the most important part of exercising that faith is teaching that religion to your children, the passing on of the faith. There is no greater gift we can give our children and no greater expression of love. And for the government to interfere in that process is a monstrous invasion of religious liberty.
Just a wonderful speech. No greater gift that we can give to our children to pass along this faith. Look, we're going up against a lot. Ephesians 2:2 shows that Satan's going after children. He's going after your children and my children. And so we have to go after our children. You read Deuteronomy 6, Deuteronomy 11, showing just how diligent we need to be in teaching these truths, teaching God's truth to our children. In Character in Crisis, it says, our ancestors, biblical Israel, fell as a nation because every man was doing what he thought was right. That means the people didn't trust their press, their politicians, or their religious leaders. The big question is why? The answer is in today's headlines and all around us. The people were deeply degenerate and cared only for themselves. That led to their downfall. The leaders couldn't call upon the people to make deep sacrifices in desperate times. The people didn't trust the leaders. It was just a sickness through and through. That's what your Bible prophesies, Isaiah 1. My father says any good history book would teach us that we are headed for disaster. Further on it says, as Alexis de Tocqueville said, any free society founded on liberty, yet without a sacred moral code to govern the actions of individuals, cannot stand. It can only end in anarchy. Because America has forsaken the ideals of our founding fathers, because we've forsaken our God, that's where we're headed. As it turns out, the Europeans were right. The grand American experiment has failed. It's failed. In fact, it would have ended even sooner were it not for God doing his work through his church, temporarily saving Manasseh. You heard all those clips from the new Attorney General. How do you suppose the radical left reacted to that speech? Well, listen to the American Spectator. It says here, this is from a couple weeks ago, Mr. Barr believes the wind is blowing against religion, and he's speaking up against the drive to de-emphasize religion still more from public life. He wants to open discussion of what the Founding Fathers thought about religion. So you heard some of that. George Washington, John Adams. It says here, William McGurn, in a thoughtful column in last week's Wall Street Journal, gathered up a sampling of the hysteria, the reaction, that is, to Barr's speech. Paul Krugman of the New York Times accused Mr. Barr of religious bigotry. He listened to that speech that you just heard and said he's a religious bigot, charging him with a pogrom-type speech. Richard Painter tweeted out that Mr. Barr's speech sounded like an installment of The Handmaid's Tale and reminded Painter of the vintage Goebbels. This is Hitler we're listening to, evidently. It says Painter must watch a lot of old-time documentaries on the Hitler channel. It says, finally, a retired Army colonel, once chief of staff to Secretary of State Colin Powell, told Joy Reid on MSNBC that the Attorney General is Torquemada in a business suit. Spectator says, some people will say anything to get on television. Whatever did Mr. Barr say? Well, actually, he said a lot. He said that the fact is that no secular creed has emerged capable of performing the role of religion to back up our laws and fortify our Constitution. And he went on, what we call values today are really nothing more than mere sentimentality, still drawing on the vapor trails of Christianity. And the Spectator says, now that's a line worth savoring. To Mr. Barr, American government relies upon citizens with strong Judeo-Christian beliefs that would allow them to be self-governing. He went on, this is really what was meant by self-government. Well, you heard that. I'll just conclude here with a reference back to the August article, My Father's Peace. Can President Trump get control of his own divided government? He says it's refreshing to see America regaining some sense of sanity thanks to an attorney general who honors the law and the Constitution. He says here, but remember, the national resurgence brought about by this end-time Jeroboam is only temporary. Prophecy is clear that America's ultimate fate is just as devastating and even far worse than the kingdom of Israel's was anciently. So some excellent history, some important history to be grounded in, to remember, and prophecy too, for that matter, on the temporary saving of the nation. You're listening to Stephen Fleury, and this is the Trumpet Daily Radio Show. If you'd like to send in some feedback, you can email the program at td@kpcg.fm. Thank you for joining us on today's show. We'll see you tomorrow.